Hi, Phil Stoddard here, clinical physiologist and inventor of MOflex. Today I want to talk about the science of MOflex, MOflex 101. When we talk about MOflex, we talk about a simple design but based on intelligent science. MOflex is the ultimate foot and ankle motion flexibility device ever created. And this starts with the foot that creates a stable base. And with that stable base, then we can create mobility at our next joint, which is the ankle. And then from then on, creating a kinetic chain of events going up the rest of the body, creating a harmony and sequence with the rest of the way the body works. And MOflex stands for motion, which is dynamic, and flexibility, which is an even balance of stability and mobility. So if we look at it, we need a balance of stability and mobility in our body. And this works in the kinetic chain, going from a stable foot to a mobile ankle to a stable knee and on up. And this stability starts in our foot or our base, okay? And that's where we have motor control. And with this motor control, we're able to receive that proprioceptive input. And from that input, we're able to develop range of motion. And this range of motion is what creates the stability and the mobility needed in every joint. So MOflex, in essence, is dynamic flexibility. And dynamic flexibility starts with stability or motor control through your feet, okay? Followed by proprioceptive input, and finally, improved mobility or range of motion in the ankle. This process repeats itself, like I said before, through the rest of the body. So with all that, human movement is extremely complex. And we go by the joint-by-joint concept. And by doing that, when we look at the human body, we start in our feet. And we must have a stable foot to create a mobile ankle. And if we have a mobile ankle, we can create stability in our knee. And if we have stability in our knee, we're able to create mobility in our hips. And if we have mobility in our hips, our lower back, our lumbar, that can be then stable so that our upper back can be mobile. Our shoulder blade then is stable, supporting the motions of our arm that become mobile. And then the lower neck is a stable area so that the upper neck can move the head about. This is critically important for the way the body works. So if we train the body, we have to train it in that sequence. So your feet and ankles are your base of support, and they dictate how the entire body moves. This process goes on and on up the body. And it's a stacking of stability, then mobility, and stability, and mobility. And this is critical for how the body should be trained, and then how the body is used. With MOflex, we have coined this pyramid release technology. So with pyramid release technology, instead of blocks stacked upon each other, it's not really how the body moves, because if we had blocks stacked upon each other, we would have continuous stability. But that's not how the body's formed, okay? The body is a sequence of pyramids going upright and then turned upside down and back upright again. So this base, this solid base, is our foot. And then from our foot being stable, we need mobility here, and this is our ankle. And with that mobility, we're able to move freely up and down. We need that stability to create mobility, and then we go to our knee, and then we have that stability again. So we can control motion. And then going up to the mobility in our hips, like I said before, followed by that stability needed in the lower back to support motion. When we lose this process, we lose proper biomechanics. And when we lose proper biomechanics, our body starts to break down or get stressed. We create compensation patterns. And we start to make our knees be way too mobile. And we end up with knee valgus and other tibial torsion. If this foot isn't stable, this ankle can't move about its proper range, causing the knee to compensate. And that's what leads to most stresses in the body. So pyramid release technology, when using MOflex, we enforce this process to happen because MOflex places your foot in the right place at the right time for the right reason through your motions. So to keep this complex science simple, we created the powers of 4. And those 4 are 4 tiers of progression, 4 key gait points in your foot, the 4 phases of gait, and then the 4 fundamental movements we start with that build into the total 7. So we have 4 tiers of progression. We have the 4 gait points in our foot. We have the 4 phases of gait. And then we have the 4 fundamental movements that all other motion is built from. So let's talk about the tier system first. So we have 4 tiers. And so MOflex is formed by having 4 tiers. And that's what that pyramid release technology creates. So at our first tier, which is actually the floor, we're at 0 degrees. Okay? At our next tier, which is minimal. So minimal is enough range of motion in dorsal flexion just to get around. Enough range to walk properly, enough range to go to sit down properly and get back up. So this is our minimal range at our first tier. At our next tier, after countless studies, we found that 35 degrees is optimal range. So optimal range means that you'll be able to optimize your performance, but then you'll also be able to keep yourself from injury, so you'll prevent injury. And studies show that there's only a 1.8% chance for a knee injury if you have optimal range of motion in your ankle. Our top tier is 45 degrees. And at 45 degrees, this is athletic. This is the LeBron James of the world. This is so much range that it's very hard for any other stress to continue up the rest of the body. So this would be your ideal range if you're an athlete. This is our optimal range that we would be going for. Our 20 degrees is our minimal, and this gradual progression is the why we built MOflex the way we did. So if your foot was applied across the MOflex, your heel would contact here, and then the ball of the foot would either be here or here. And let's say we're working at optimal range. And let's say this is the ball of the foot, and the foot comes up here, and this is your heel. So your heel would take on a certain amount of weight distribution. And optimally, your foot or your heel should take on 75% of your load, of your weight. And then at the ball of your foot right here, this should be split between the 2 sides of the ball of the foot at 25%. And then the toe just acts as kind of a kickstand. So with the tier system, it's forcing your foot to properly distribute weight. And proper weight distribution is essential for proper biomechanics. So the importance of a 4-tier system. So let's talk about it. The MOflex tiers are scientifically calibrated to provide optimal weight distribution in the foot. Okay, so then the tiers help the user mimic important biomechanical sequences needed to correct and improve foot stabilization through contact, which is at the root of physical wellness and peak performance. The gaps between the tiers allow for arch elasticity, which allows for minimal tension and torque on all joints that lie above. And then these tiers on the front, top, and opposite side are designed for specific exercises focused on dynamic stretch and release, not just static stretching. So with MOflex, we have a 4-gate point system. So the points of contact with the ground to create proper stability. And these gate points are, the first gate point is your heel. Second is the outside ball of the foot. The third is the inside or medial ball of the foot. And then finally, the great toe is number 4. And then these 4 points create a system of contact, which starts with the tripod of the foot. And this tripod needs to work in sequence to stabilize. And we talked about it before, that the heel is at 75% pressure during stance and stance exercises or movements. And then there's a split here at the ball of 25%. The toe then acts as a lever to control, like a kickstand, or to help propel motion. So we have these different points with different contact, with different pressure in all 4 gate points. Okay, so we have a tripod that works to kind of stabilize our body, much like a tripod or stand. And if we have a tripod stand, and imagine this is our heel, and this is our inside ball of the foot, and this is our outside ball of the foot. And say we're flat-footed, okay? So now we're tipping in, okay? So the pressure in then causes my foot to be here. So the stabilization is off to one side. And if I'm off to one side, I'm creating knee valgus or what have you. So it's really important to have that pressure stabilized through each of those tripod points, okay? So when we create a good arch in the foot, we inevitably form what we call the tripod, okay? So the 3 points of the tripod, like I said before, consists of the heel, the outer ball, and the inner ball, which then also uses the toe to stabilize like a kickstand or mobilize in dynamic motion. So from our 4 tiers of function into our 4 points of contact, we get into our 4 phases of gait. And those 4 phases of gait are loading, then mid-stance, terminal, and pre-swing. And through each of those motions, we apply pressure differently on the MOflex. So we go through each of those phases, learning to create better stability in the foot and creating better mobility in the ankle, which then travels through what is a very basic function that we all do, which is walking or our gait. So then our final power of 4 is our 4 fundamental movements. And fundamental movements starts with our basic fundamentals of how we are dynamic or how we move. And we have to build upon those, just like we build upon the joints in the body, we build upon movements or movement patterns. And the most basic of patterns is stance. Without a proper stance, you can't move any other movement. You have to be able to statically hold yourself in line, which we call the plumb line, and we need to have proper balance and proprioception and motor control to then dynamically move into our next fundamental movement pattern, which is walking or gait. From gait and that proper movement, which is very basic again, something that we all do, we need to learn how then to hinge or bend. So our next fundamental pattern is hinge. And with a proper hinge, then we learn how to properly squat or sit down. So then we create the proper pattern of squatting. If we then create and understand that pattern and do it right, we then can rotate our body and we can do proper rotation. From our rotation, we then learn to pull properly. And if we can pull, we can push. So just like the body and the biomechanics of the foot and the ankle and the knee and the hip and on up, we need a proper sequencing of fundamental patterns of movement, which starts with stance, then gait, then hinge, squat, rotation, pull, then push. And if we're not training the body in that sequence and we're jumping right into rotation, this is why we don't see improvements in performance and why we end up injured. So let's talk about MOflex and compare it to other devices, because that's probably what you're thinking in your head right now. Well, I use a slant board or a wobble board, or what about, orthotic inserts? Well, let's take a look at that. So I put MOflex slant board, wobble board, and orthotics. And let's start with, let's correct foot stability, okay? Correct foot stability. MOflex, check. Slant board does not do that, okay? Does the wobble board do that? No, because it's unstable. So how can you create stability if you're unstable? So definitely no. And then orthotics, they say they do. They say they support it, but it's really pseudo. It's pseudo support. You're not really building a better foot and foot mechanics. You're actually creating a crutch that leads to worse foot mechanics. So I'm just going to say no, they do not do that. Okay, let's talk about ankle mobility. Okay, so MOflex, yes, we have the ranges of motion in dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Slant board, they say it's static, but we'll give them a check. Wobble board, definitely not. It's unstable in the foot, which then causes all this crazy action in the ankle that causes it to overstabilize, because now we put a platform underneath their feet that makes them unstable, so now we're having mobility at the foot, which then causes the ankle to freeze up and overstabilize. So, no. And then orthotics, again, here we go. It's not a true stable foot, so then now the ankle has to stabilize, so it's not doing that at all either. So let's talk about then the 4 points of contact system. MOflex, yes. Slant board, no, it's a flat surface. There's no tiers to it. You can't contact, you can't feel where your arch should be, whether it's a short foot or long foot or how that foot works. So we're going to give that a no. Wobble board, definitely not. Again, flat surface and not controlled. And then orthotics, they're just supporting where your deficiencies are, not really focused on your gait points. So the next thing that we have to look at, do we have the 4 ranges of progression, okay? MOflex, we have those ranges of ankle progression. In the slant board, we basically have 1 range. Now granted, you can change or get different slant boards, or some of them change, so we'll give it a check. Wobble board, no, unless you're off balance, and then you're creating those ranges. Orthotics, definitely not, because this is just a pseudo structure underneath your foot. Okay, so we have those. So how about the fundamental movement? Well, MOflex, you practice all 7 fundamental movement patterns. Slant board, that'd be pretty hard to do on a slant board. It's really built for stance alone. You can do some dynamic work on it. I'm sorry, that's an X there. Wobble board, definitely not. Very hard to do anything but try to stabilize on a wobble board. And orthotics, not really made to go through fundamental movement patterns. So let's look at the next thing. So does it practice the 4 phases of walking or gait? Yes to MOflex. Slant board, again, no. This is a single static position. Wobble board, definitely not, because you're keeping your feet still. And orthotics are supposed to support the phases of gait, but do they correct them? Definitely not. Let's think about some others. There are different, rehab integration, body alignment work. There's different parts of the body working with biomechanics. What kind of grouping fundamental and how much integration of rehab and sports performance, MOflex could pretty much conquer it all. The slant board, kind of one-dimensional. The wobble board, very hard to do a lot of different dynamic, especially, again, without that stable foot. Now, if you have a stable foot, you may be able to do some training on the wobble board, but you'd be pretty advanced for that. And then the orthotics, they're giving you a false sense into how the body is supposed to work, so you're actually building upon a dysfunction, which is not good. So if we look at our chart, obviously our true winner is MOflex. And all of the studies, and these are hundreds and thousands of studies, they show that limited ankle mobility through dorsiflexion and a loss of foot stabilization causes biomechanical compensation and increases the risk for various injuries as well as a loss of functional performance. And after tested with these different devices, MOflex was the only device to create optimal performance and bulletproof injury. And the great thing about MOflex is that we're able to what we call plug and play. And what does that mean? We can use MOflex as an assessment tool to look at our body structure and to assess what's right and wrong. We can use it as a basic protocol for rehab, for sports, for whatever, by going through the 7 basic fundamental movement patterns, which again are stance, gait, hinging, squatting, rotating, and pull and push. And then finally, we can use it as a user specific. So we could use it for basketball training, or for our tennis game, or for our basic fitness routine. Or maybe we use it at work to help us stand better at our desk or be active. Maybe it's the first thing you use when you get up in the morning, just so that you can walk to whatever and go to breakfast. MOflex makes life simple because it's based on complex science and design. So to recap, we'll talk about MOflex and its design and the powers of 4. As you can see, like I spoke about before, we have the 4 tiers of progression from the floor to the first tier, to the second tier at 35 degrees, and the 4th tier, which was athletic, at 45 degrees. We have the 4 points of contact with the foot, from the heel being on the ground, to the ball of the foot on either tier, on sides here, and then our toe being at the next tier. So we're contacting each of those tiers for those gait points. We have the 4 phases of gait that we use across the MOflex. And then finally, we have the 4 that builds upon the 7 basic functions on MOflex. So to look more deeply, we'll take a look at my feet on the MOflex. So with MOflex, we have the powers of 4. And those are the 4 tiers on the MOflex. So when applying the foot, we can go at minimal, optimal, or we can go at athletic. We also have the 4 gait points or contact points: our heel, our outer ball of the foot, our inner ball of the foot, and then our toe. So those points should be engaged with each of those tiers or the floor. Then we have the 4 phases of gait, going from loading to mid-stance to terminal, and then to pre-swing, and then walking through. So we practice those phases of gait. Then we have our 4 fundamental movement patterns, which are stance, so appropriately putting our foot in the right tier and on the right points of contact and holding a proper stance. Then from that stance, we go back again to those phases of gait and practice that. And from that, we then perform the proper hinge, which is our next basic function. and then our squat. We then build upon that with rotation, with pull, and then finally push. So again, I'm Phil Stoddard, clinical physiologist and inventor of MOflex. And this was MOflex Science 101.